What lurks in the darkness of our minds is a mystery to most of us. It comes as no surprise that darkness affects everyone in different ways, from kids to teenagers and even adults. I, for one, am still iffy when it comes to being in the dark. From the age of 13, I always felt like something was watching me from the shadows. Something dark. Something inhuman. This gave me feelings of paranoia, and I felt like I had to keep looking over my shoulders to make sure that nothing would follow me. I remember that one night I was in bed listening to the rain as it struck my window. The flash of lightning flooded my room, following a thunderous roar. It was soothing to me, as I love watching lightning storms because they were a form of art created by the earth. After a while of listening and watching, I began to get sleepy, so I decided to lay my head on my pillow to rest for the night. Later that same night, I suddenly woke up to this eerie feeling that something was watching me. It was oddly quiet for a stormy night, and when I tried to get up to turn my light on, I couldn't move. It felt like something was holding my body down. I turned my gaze to the foot of my bed, and there it was, this huge dark mass hovering by my feet. I tried to scream, but I felt like my voice was taken from me. Nothing but the feeling of pain and fear filled my room, and as this thing got closer, I could hear my heart beating faster and faster. This is it. This is how I'm gonna die. This thing, whatever it was, began to snarl and growl as it was now hovering over my body. And within a moment of sheer panic, my body shot up and my voice came back and I fucking screamed out loud causing my parents to wake. And as they entered my room and lights turned on, I was sitting in the corner, holding my knees close to my chest and hyperventilating. My parents assured me that it was only a nightmare, but it's hard to try to accept that it was in my mind, or was it? Or was it something else entirely, and I just so happened to get lucky and fight it off with all of my strength? The darkness is still there in my room, waiting. I would like to share a personal experience that I had in my childhood home in the early 90s when I was 6 years old. This isn't the first experience, but it definitely wasn't the last. But it is the only time I ever truly saw her. A quick backstory. The house is a brick colonial built by one of the very first families that settled outside of Philadelphia. They were a very affluent family who owned a large portion of land in the area and worked in the city. The house was lived in by their descendants well into the early 1900s, so as you can imagine, a lot of history, births, and deaths going on within those walls. As a child, I suffered from nightmares, a lot of them. It was a commonplace for me to wake up in the middle of the night, jarred awake by some terrifying dream, and this time was no different. On this particular night, I had awoken from a scary dream, and in order to calm myself down, I lay quietly in my bed and scanned the dark corners in my bedroom for some unknown threat. I had no idea what I expected to find, but I definitely remember the feeling of what could be hiding here in the shadows. As I looked around, nothing seemed to be out of ordinary at first, but then all of a sudden, there she was standing in my doorway, staring directly at me. Her face was emotionless. She was very beautiful, with shoulder-length brown hair and had large waves towards the bottom. And she was wearing a long white nightgown. Forgive me for the cliche, but that is what she was wearing. I stared at her in shock and confusion, and she just stared back. I didn't understand what was happening. But what I did know was that there was a woman in my house in the middle of the night whom I did not recognize, and she was looking right into my eyes. She was clear as day, as if somebody was just standing there watching over their child as they slept. The wheels in my head were turning, and all I could come up with was, this person should not be here. The next thing I remember doing was throwing the covers over my head with my heart racing and thinking over and over, please go away. I have no idea how long I hid under the covers, but when I emerged, she was gone. From what my mother told me, I didn't tell her right away what had happened. I think she said I told her a couple of days later that I saw a woman in the house. From that point onwards, even to the day when I visit my parents who still live there, you bet that door is still shut. Friends asked me how on earth I could live there. The way I see it, her presence had never been malicious, and she lived there first, so it is just as much at her house as it is mine if she chooses to stay. She does seem to have a sense of humor, though. I thought about saving that story for a different day, but it goes directly correlate to the original, so I would add it if anyone is interested in reading further. Fast forward to last summer, I was back home for a short time running the family business, which is also on the same property in a separate building. The topic of hauntings came up with one of the employees I have grown close with. I told her that we have a resident ghost in the family home and told her that story that I just told here. She jokingly said to remind her to never come over to visit. I reassured her that it wasn't that bad and I personally hadn't experienced anything recently when I visit, and even made a joke that perhaps she had moved out. We laughed and that was the end of it, or so I thought. That very same evening, I came downstairs to ask my mother something and she found that I was alone in the house. The property is pretty large, so it is not uncommon to be around and not know where the person is. I went to the kitchen and found some almonds to snack on. Just then, I felt like someone was in the house. I figured it was my mom coming back in, and I checked around the corner and there was no one. I called out to her and received no response. It was strange, but I shrugged it off and went back to snacking. I had my back to the entrance to the kitchen, and I just sort of standing there staring out the kitchen window, daydreaming. That is when I felt it. Someone poked me on the back of my arm. It was a playful poke, that kind you do when you sneak up behind someone and tap them to get their attention. During the time it took me to turn to see who was there, I remember wondering who it could possibly be. My parents are not people who sneak up behind others and poke them. It was no one. No one was there. I fully expected someone to be standing there. So when there wasn't, I was so taken aback that I let out a startled yell and power walked straight for the front door and left the house. The feeling I had was like reality slapped me in the face. I'm completely convinced it was her giving me a playful nudge saying, "Guess who was still here?" That really freaked me out. I can handle little things here and there, but being physically touched, no thank you. When I was around 6 years old, I saw something very scary, but sometimes even give me chills to this day. I was in the room with my grandmother and asked her for a toy bear that I liked. She said that it was in her room and the lights were out. When I was about to turn them on, I saw it. It was right in the corner, a boy a little bit taller than me. He had shorts and no shirt and was relatively skinny and short hair. What was even weirder than that? He was imitating some kind of smoke. A dark smoke or something. I felt like something was very wrong, and he started to walk towards me while I froze. I could see his eyes, but that about it. He had no expression because his body was almost entirely darkness. Then I feel something or someone behind me. It was my grandmother with a shocked look on her face. She turned the lights on and he disappeared, but some traces of smoke flew out of the window. That scared me the most on this was the reaction from my grandmother. She was scared shitless and drove me to some kind of church or spiritualism center, or that's what it's called in Brazil. I guess it was to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but it worked. Still to this day, it gives me the creeps.